Welcome to Money Matters. I'm David Kroll from Mortgage Network, and this is Emily Johnson from Polaris Capital. And we try to take big national economic events and international, world, global economic events and make sense of them and try and assess the impact on Beaufort County, of all places. So Money Matters, today we're filming on Friday, the 4th of November. We have the national election coming up in 4 days, and it seems a suitable topic today to assess the impact on various sort of economic sectors. First, the markets. Try to give an assessment of if the election does this or if the election does that, what the impact on the markets will be. How are the markets positioning themselves? How do they position themselves? How do they hedge their bets? So Emily will lead off with that. And then in the second half, I'll lead off with what some of the policy decisions that we might see from a Clinton presidency or a Trump presidency and what impact those will have on the economy.
Okay. So starting out with markets. So for those of you who read a lot about what is going on with the markets and leading up to the presidential election, and historically what has gone on with markets leading up to the presidential election and slightly after, you've seen lots of statistics saying typically if you have a Democrat that wins and they expect the Democrat's going to win, then the market goes up 1.2% prior, and then it goes up again a few percentage points afterwards. If you know you have a Republican, it goes up 0.6%, and then it goes up a few percentage points afterwards. If it's an unknown, then it goes up or it goes down 0.6%, blah, blah, blah. The bottom line is we expected that the market would like certainty. And so we saw some positives in the market for the last few months as we lovingly call the election sort of the clown trains. There's clown trains going in all directions. We're not going to pick one side on that. And so with the clown trains in their momentum to the end, in their momentum to the finish line, there have been some moments where things look pretty darn certain, and for one reason or another. And as that happens, the market tended to run up. However, in the last few weeks, not just because of the email scandal, but even just in the last few weeks, as we've been getting closer to the election, the market sort of started to tick back down again. And that's notable. I mean, again, you're sort of reading the tea leaves and, you know, you've got your 8 ball somewhere that you're looking at and hoping that it's going to tell you what's going to happen in the future. But really what that's saying is that there is a lot more uncertainty around this election right now. You hear pundits that say, well, we're also concerned now that it could mean that if there's definitely a Hillary presidency, which was expected, then there's certain sectors that have been leading their way down. Same thing goes for if there was definitely a Trump presidency, but we've never really felt that there was definitely a Trump presidency ever, so there's not a whole lot of anecdotal evidence to what that says. But right now, there's definitely a lot more uncertainty leading up to this election, and if we actually have another down, and when I say it's been negative, it's sort of been piecemeal negative. We haven't had those big gyrations of 200, 300 point moves of the, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with my money type thing. It's just more been, 40 points, ending 40 points, ending 60 points, ending 20 points, sort of, in that general vicinity. Certain sectors getting hit a lot harder than others. We can talk about that in a second. But it's really interesting how we're suddenly seeing this real uncertainty. And it's a lot like a lot of the pundits and analysts have been calling leading up to this of, well, we thought there was certainty, but there's not. And I actually saw two interesting polls. Obviously, pretty much every poll, the Wall Street Journal poll, the CNBC poll, the MSNBC poll, whatever the other well-known polls are that I know you know them much better than I do, pretty much all of them see Hillary in the lead across the board in the United States. State by state, it varies, but across the board, they see her winning by whatever the margin is. So I saw 2 different posts this week. There were polls this week that were really interesting. One was a social media, algorithm. A fellow that created this algorithm that just tracks social media around elections. So it looks at the number of Instagram messages, Facebook messages, tweets, etc., and sort of gauges those and puts them into some sort of an algorithm, because he's 1,000 times brighter than I am, and how he builds that in, and then takes that and extrapolates who the winner is going to be of certain elections. They've been through 4 market cycles, and he hasn't been wrong yet. And he is actually showing Trump at 76%. I know that's crazy, but that's an interesting anecdote, just why that would be, because I'm not a particularly political person on social media, but I know that there's a lot of that's going. And then the other was actually my daughter wanted to vote, and she's 9, so we found this Kids Vote site that I think is through Nickelodeon or something like that. And you can go on and you can learn about the candidates, and then your child votes. If anybody who knows me knows that my daughter is probably just going to vote the exact same way I am, even though she loves you too. But so we go on, and she votes, and then you can see what the results are. And this was a couple of days ago. And she actually, it was so interesting. Trump was actually 4 times the votes that Hillary had among this Kids Vote thing. It was amazing, because every other poll is showing the absolute opposite. So I'm sure there's lots of different, there's lots of different reasons why these things. You could talk about which demographics are participating. You could talk about access to the internet. You could talk about access to social media. Blah blah blah. Who talks about what? But those were just 2 really interesting polls. And I guess the point of that whole thing is not so much what's going on in the markets, but it's an indicator of why perhaps there is this uncertainty, because it's not as straight and clear as it used to be 4 months ago. I mean, this leading up, and who knows, it could be an overwhelming victory on Tuesday. And what that could mean, and what the expectation is if it is overwhelming in a Clinton direction, then probably you're going to see the market tick up a little bit, and it's just going to be a little bit sideways because there was some expectation there. If it's a Trump victory, I've seen everything from the market's going to shambles to you're going to see it skyrocket. Specifically, certain sectors that have been hit by the expectation of a Hillary presidency: healthcare, biotech, finance. Some of those sectors that have really either taken a nosedive or have plugged along as a result of that, those could actually rally big time if we didn't see a definite Hillary presidency. But by and large, the market as a whole, if we group the whole thing, the expectation is that it will just sort of trot maybe a few points up. So now that I've had my monologue.
I agree it's going to be interesting. The impact of these aberrant polls seems to be a phenomenon that is it's a combination of the enthusiasm effect, the change effect, the effect of excitement and difference in the election. Trump representing something different, something flamboyant, something orange-haired, versus the same old.
I wasn't sure if you said aberrant or abhorrent.
Aberrant, abhorrent. It was one of those things that I said. I'm not quite sure.
It's sort of mixed.
But there you have a candidacy, and consistent with these polls, you have a candidate who, when asked the question where he gets his information, said from the shows. Doesn't read, doesn't study, has no interest in policy. Hopefully will, if elected, surround himself with very bright people. But these are polls by what are called underinformed electorate. These are polls that are based upon flamboyance, snippets of information, not on policy considerations.
And yet, you could say that about the other polls as well. If they randomly call 15,000 people consistently,
you can say it about the entire polling business.
Right. It's almost like the jobs numbers. It comes back. It says, "Oh, suddenly we're at 4.9%." Really? It doesn't feel
but
like
the jobs. But that was the thing that I was going to go on to say. The economy is ticking along in its slow growth, continuous, upwardly sloped slow growth mechanism. It does appear that we have yet another solid jobs report. It's slightly off expectations. That occurred this morning, the 4th of November. This is all positive stuff. The Fed will increase interest rates. There's about an 90% chance now that the Fed will increase interest rates by a quarter at their December meeting.
And yet, it would be interesting if that gets skewed one way or the other with the election, because there is a question of that, which shouldn't be. But
it's interesting that we really this is an election year and a very passionate election year, but there's been absolutely a minimum of real policy conversation. It's really been what it appears to be, a television show with slam-bang anger and insult and drama, but very, very little serious policy discussion that's made its way
Agreed.
into the forefront. So the markets and major corporations, I mean, it really leaves the unseen engines of government and the unseen engines of the economy to tick along almost independent of the election. It's an interesting phenomenon.
And I think in the second half of the show, we should start off with what's actually happening with the interest rate and bond market, because that's sort of
That's
been
very
interesting as well.
interesting,
So
yeah.
we'll be right back in a few minutes with the second half of More Money Matters. Stick with us.